This is Tim and Sid across the Sportsnet radio network on TV, Sportsnet, and Sportsnet 360. Still to come, Brian Burke will join us 6 p.m. Eastern Time, 3 Pacific. Elliot Friedman will also join us as we continue to talk about the return to hockey for the National Hockey League.
Donald Fehr is the Executive Director of the National Hockey League Players Association. He is joining us from his home in suburban New York. Donald, well, first off, how are you doing? How's the family? How's everyone holding up?
So far, everybody's pretty good. We've got, we're here and we've got kids and grandkids spread out across North America, but so far we're pretty lucky.
Good to hear. We're all kind of talking about this in the context of something that we've never seen before. Obviously, health and safety is paramount for not only players and executives and coaches and all personnel that have to do with hockey, but in the greater society as a whole. But that being the context of it, what was your reaction to hearing and negotiating this with Gary Bettman on where you landed?
I think I could put it this way. We both understand, as do all the players, and I assume all the owners, that we're in a situation in which, the larger scale events are much more significant than the ones we're dealing with. That said, we need to try, if it's possible to do it, and if it can be done safely, and we can get all the other things agreed to that we need to come back. Obviously, it's good for the business, but I think it's a good thing generally, and it's a signal of return to normalcy. But it's one of those things, every time you think about it, you end up with 3 more questions than you started with.
It's incredible to think of that. So let's go down the road of some of those questions here, Donald. A lot of your players right now, a lot of the union are right now in Europe. It's a dicey situation to get back into the country once you're back in Canada specifically. There's still the quarantine. What directive is being given to those still in Europe by both the league and yourself?
It's not a directive. It's basically to let them know what the schedule is. And at the moment, we don't have the facilities open yet. We hope to open phase 2 sometime next week. But until the logistics are done with all the health and safety protocols, we won't be able to do that. And then we'll see what happens over the course of the month and look to open training camps, assuming that on a health and safety basis we can do that sometime in July. Won't be earlier than the first 2 weeks of July. If circumstances dictate, it could be later than that. And then what players will need to do is to begin to make arrangements, assuming all those other things are done, to come back in. We already have an indication from the U.S. government that they'll be able to get back into the States, and hopefully that'll be true, even if there's a quarantine period that has to be served in Canada.
Donald Fehr, who is the Executive Director of the NHLPA, joining us here on Tim and Sid. Is health and safety and testing, therefore, the main concern of the PA as you take these next couple of steps?
I don't know how to say main when compared to other things, except to say that it's the one thing that you can't compromise on. That's what it comes down to. The nature of most agreements, labor agreements, certainly, as you look for a way to find compromises. If I do this for you, you'll do this for me, or we'll split the baby in this fashion or some other fashion. You can't do that with the health concerns. You have to be satisfied that you've done everything you can, everything that's reasonably possible. The public health authorities in the various states and provinces are in agreement that you can go forward, and then you have to implement it right. You got to get it right.
Donald, have players stepped forward in the last little while, either to their player reps or to you directly, and said, I'm not comfortable with this. I don't know if I can come back. My parents are at risk. I have health issues in my family. I don't know if I can do this. What happens to a player if they are not comfortable playing in this format?
Well, obviously, what we're going to need to do as we finish the agreements it'll take with the NHL in order to get this done is to address that issue, because there are players that will have both general and in some cases specific concerns that'll have to be reached. We haven't really delved into those. That's part of what I would call the phase 3 negotiations, but we'll get to those fairly quickly. But it's obviously an issue that's going to have to be addressed in our agreement.
is also long-term health care for anyone who listen. There are leagues that have negotiated the idea that they have health care, especially in the United States, for their life if they play in a league. Is that something that the NHLPA is going to have to work into any sort of deal if indeed there are players playing during a global pandemic?
Well, there will obviously be provisions to make sure that the health insurance in effect covers it, and I'm reasonably certain that it does, and that if an individual unfortunately comes down with something as a result of playing or while playing, that it's considered a hockey-related condition. I really don't believe in the end that'll be a major issue here.
Okay.
Donald Fehr, Executive Director of the NHLPA, here on Tim and Sid, on a day where Commissioner Gary Bettman announced that a 24-team format, return to play, has been effectively decided upon. There are still some elements inside of that need to be figured out, but a significant announcement, and that's why Donald has been kind enough to join us today. How would you describe the back and forth, Donald, between the league and the players over the last several months? Obviously, money for the most part is not an issue here. The NHL and the NBA are in rather fortunate circumstances where most of the regular season has been played. How would you describe the back and forth in that relationship?
Well, I think I could describe it this way. There's a recognition that there are a set of common problems to be solved that are nobody's fault and nobody can fix on their own. That's the starting place. And you get into the health and safety. Obviously, when you get into things like a playoff format in these unusual circumstances, then the players are concerned, as are people on the management side, with the fairness and the integrity of the tournament, given all the uncertainties and that we didn't finish the normal process to determine who qualifies for the Stanley Cup playoffs. Obviously, there are financial considerations. There's no question about that. Those are going to have to be dealt with, and because of the payment structure for players, it obviously affects this year and probably next year. We hope not long after that, because things are going to return to normal. But we've got to reach agreement on all those things. Those discussions have begun, but I can't tell you I expect them to be finished in the next day or two.
We've heard rhetoric from both the Major League Baseball Players Association, the league, at least through intermediaries in the media, if you believe in such a thing. The NBA has talked about their CBA extensively because both those come up in 2021. Are you worried about the future of your CBA as it pertains to concessions that are made to make sure that the game gets back underway right now?
Well, you are obviously concerned about those things going forward, and you have to guard against them as best you can. And if you can't guard against them sufficiently, you don't make an agreement. That's basically what it comes down to. Our CBA is different than the other two in terms of how these are treated and in terms of the timing. I don't know if that puts us in a little bit better or a little bit worse position. Only time will tell. I mean, look, the great uncertainty we have is not this season. We know what the revenue decline will be within limits with we play the playoffs or if we're not able to, what it is. What we don't know is next year and the year after. And we're going to have to reach agreements which anticipate as best we can what those could be and have some provisions everybody can live with.
Donald Fehr, NHLPA Executive Director, here on Tim and Sid.
Doesn't sound like an easy task.
No, it doesn't sound like an easy task at all.
You're right.
And I don't envy anyone with that task.
Excuse me, the last intermediary that may have served a really useful purpose was John, whatever his name was, during the Cuban Missile Crisis. And if you don't know that story, you should learn it. That was where the Russian contact came.
What's the movie they did? 21 Days. One of the best movies I've ever seen was about the Cuban.
13 days. 13. Thank you.
13, yeah.
As usual, Donald has the correct answer. 13 Days. One of my favorite movies of all time. Please go see it. We're still in binge land. Hockey's not back for a little bit. You'll love it. In terms of the format, Donald, how unified were the players here on the 24 teams split into two conferences, obviously, and specifically your take on the 1 to 4 slots and the round robin for those seedings? How much discussion took place internally in terms of that?
A lot, an awful lot. And as a result of that discussion and there's still some things that aren't completely resolved, as you know. But as a result of that discussion, I think that I was really impressed with the players, both the 5 players on the committee, as well as all the player reps and all the other players that expressed their views either directly or through their player reps, because what they were really concerned about is making sure of 2 things. One, that under these weird circumstances, how can we be as fair as it is possible to be, both to what happened during the regular season and that the regular season wasn't finished, and then how do we make sure that the tournament itself has the kind of integrity that it needs. And it was uppermost in the players' minds, I think, in terms of the structure. Nothing's perfect. Everything's going to require judgment and so on. But those were real concerns.
It feels like we could rifle through the concerns and the things that you've got to work through for about an hour here, or maybe hours on end, and we don't want to put you through that. But seeing as you served as the executive director of the NHLPA, and for those who don't know or are young and don't remember that you had the same role with the MLBPA from 1983 to 2009, you've seen your fair share of negotiations. Has this task and the time frame and the amount of things that you have gone through already and will have to go through in the future, the hardest that you've dealt with in your time with either PA?
I don't know if hardest is the right word, but the one with the most serious life implications, yes. The one with the most things that we can't control, yes. The one which has the most things that are not only unknown, but are at this point unknowable, yes. And so that puts us in a difficult situation. That said, that's the same situation everybody's in, throughout the U.S. and Canada and most of the rest of the world, so far as I can tell. We're not unique in that regard at all, and we just have to do the very best we can under all the circumstances. Some judgments in the end are going to have to be made, and they clearly won't please everybody on both sides. I just don't know any other way around it. You just have to keep plowing ahead.
Donald Fehr, Executive Director of the NHLPA, here on Tim and Sid. Donald, out of curiosity, and I'm not asking you your own personal opinions on what's going on the baseball side, because you it's not fair to ask you that. But considering, as Tim mentioned, how long you were in that world and what's going on now, do you keep an eye a little bit? I know you're a busy man, but do you keep a little eye on what's going on there, both as a reference point for you and just as a guy who's been in baseball as long as you were?
Sure, of course. It would be impossible not to. And, it won't surprise you that we have regular contact with our counterparts in the football, baseball, and basketball unions, associations. We're dealing with a lot of problems which are very similar. Some are different, but a lot of them are very similar, so we do that. And obviously, I want to know how it works out. That said, my knowledge of baseball economics and the dynamics of the negotiating atmosphere at this point is a decade old. That's too old to make judgments from.
Right.
Fair enough.
We realize that you're very busy on this day, and we know that you have other commitments. So we appreciate the time that you spent with us, and wish you the best moving forward. Thanks for doing this.
You got it.